We're not talking about the best of them. We're just talking about the rest of them.
Not the worst parts, but the best parts. And the best parts we have. The best of the rest.
Hello, and help yourself. Welcome to Best of the Rest, the show where we take a second look at movies that were poorly received upon release and challenge ourselves to only talk about the things we like and what the movie does well. It's Slasher Month, and this week we are talking the 1985 film A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge. My name is Chris Logan, and I am joined, as always, by the boogeyman of my dreams, Andrew Williams. Are you ready for this one, Andrew?
You might want to get that checked out, Chris. If I'm showing up in your dreams so much, that's not great. But
Nothing I can do about it. I thought you were doing this intentionally, Andrew.
Well, we have a problem, folks. Now
you podcast in your dreams, you podcast in real life.
It consumes you, man. But what was your question?
I don't know, Andrew. What's your history with this movie?
Yes.
A Nightmare on Elm Street 2. What's your history with the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise as a whole? You a big fan? You seeing all the entries?
I think it's like with any franchise or slasher series. I think there's highs and lows. I think this one is no exception. There's, it's kind of a joke that almost any horror franchise, even if it starts off with like a really great, even solid first installment, it's not at all uncommon for the subsequent entries to kind of deeply fall in quality. But there's definitely several movies within this franchise that I think are good to great. And it's obviously not something I saw like in theaters. I don't even think I saw the reboot in theaters. So I don't think I've ever seen a Nightmare on Elm Street movie in theaters. This one especially, since it came out a year and a half before I was alive. So I definitely wasn't I wasn't making any moves here to go to the theaters and see it. But this is also definitely not something my parents were letting me watch as a kid either. My mom was very big on us, like, no, we don't watch that. The kids don't watch that. Unless it was like the taped off television version where all the swears are cut and the gore and all that. But no, as I got into, you get to that late teens, you start being able to go to Blockbuster and rent movies by yourself. You just start getting all the different franchises. And this was one I remember me, my sister, and my brother, and a couple of her friends, I think, or maybe a couple of ours, were just like renting these installments, like one by one, watching them, and then literally like going back and swapping them out, like in a continuous like marathon. Like we would finish the 3 we'd rented and be like, all right, let's go back and get the next ones. And this was like over the course of a Friday night and a Saturday that we just literally just kept getting all the movies and pretty much watched through all of them. So that was, a fond memory there. I was reminiscing with my sister a bit about that today. But so some good memories. Obviously not. I bought the Blu-ray set of all of them years ago and have watched them all on and on. But this one in particular is not one that I've gone back to particularly heavily. So I was excited to go back and check it out and give it another look.
Yeah, these franchises, if you're coming to them late, they came out in the 80s and you don't get around to them until the 90s or 2000s or today, it is kind of fun to like binge them all. It's fun to watch the quality go up and down, and it's fun to think of it as, almost like those movie marathons they used to play late night on TV, right? Where like it doesn't matter so much if the quality's going up and down. It's just kind of an event, a thing to do with friends, and just a way to pass the time during the month of October. And I think it's just a fun way to consume these franchises. However, it makes it to a point, and I usually use Friday the 13th franchise to make this point, where it's like, if you want to talk about a specific one, if you say like, hey, remember part 4? Hey, remember part 7? Hey, remember part 2? It all kind of muddles together. It gets hard to kind of dissect, like, which entry is that? What's the popular kill in that one?
Right.
Like, what's the hook of that movie? It really starts to run together. whenever we were picking a movie for A Nightmare on Elm Street, there's a few that are, quote, poorly received. There's a few we could choose from to include during this month. And I think we just kind of settled on, all right, what's considered the first, I don't know, misstep of the franchise? Because this is one of those slasher movies that starts off with a strong entry that has somewhat of a good critical reception and was kind of acknowledged by doing something different with the genre. And then, like you said, they start pumping them out once a year, and the franchise becomes what it becomes, and the quality is what it is. So, part 2, not as well received as part 1. So that's why we're jumping in here. But I mean, I'm excited to talk into it. I talked a lot in the last episode about how much I like slasher movies, and good, bad, it really doesn't matter to me. I'm always going to enjoy them. Speaking of slashers, don't forget this Sunday in our Discord, we will be having a watch party for Halloween Ends, the end of the latest Halloween trilogy starring Jamie Lee Curtis. I am super excited to see this one, and I'm excited to watch it with all of you. So if you haven't already, go to our show notes, join our Discord. It's just a fun place to hang out and talk about nerdy stuff, and occasionally watch movies like this Sunday, where we're watching Halloween Ends. Andrew, it's even as we're recording this, it's already October. It's already spooky season. Have you started your scary movie marathon yet? Have you watched any horror movies so far?
Well, I actually did. I was just talking about this with my brother. But yeah, yesterday was full disclosure, folks. It's only the second, so there's not a lot to haven't really dived into anything too deep yet. But today I obviously did watch Nightmare on Elm Street 2 just to refresh myself for our show here. But yesterday I did watch I watched the new Hocus Pocus. Just, it was out there. Figured why not see what the hype's all about.
Did you like it?
Yeah, it was fine. I think
friend of the show, my wife has watched it. I haven't watched it yet. I think we're gonna watch it again, like as a family. She did. She said it's a perfectly fine Disney sequel. I think is how she described it. If you've got much loftier expectations than that, why? It's Hocus Pocus 2. So from what I've heard, it delivers on exactly what you're expecting from it.
Yeah, I think so. And there's a couple of good standout performances from our new cast as well. I also did watch the new, this is on Amazon Prime, but the adaptation of Grady Hendrix' My Best Friend's Exorcism, which is, like I said, it's an adaptation of his novel of the same name, which has a very, it's set in the 80s. It uses that 80s setting to great effect. And the movie does obviously take place in the 80s as well. It uses the malls, the setups. Maybe didn't quite do everything it could have with the material, but I thought it was still a fine watch. And glad to see some of his stuff getting adapted. I think he's got a few other things that are in the works adapted from his novels. So starting off with those, but my plan is to watch something every day of some kind. That's my hope, and maybe when we get at the end, we can share our personal highlights of the things we watched.
Yeah, sounds good. There's a lot that I want to dive into this year. Did I see you say that you saw Smile in theaters?
I did. I saw that. Yeah, unfortunately, I saw that in September. But I saw that.
So it doesn't count. Don't talk about it. It doesn't count.
It doesn't count.
How was it? Any good? Worst thing?
I liked it. The reviews have actually been really solid. So I liked it overall. Some little quibbles, but overall, I think it's a very effective use of its setup to make something that's pretty unsettling. So recommend it.
I gotta say, I don't watch a lot of TV, like live TV, network TV.
Sure,
You're watching, like most people, streaming next day on Hulu or whatever. But I was watching Friday Night SmackDown. Gotta watch it live, Yeah. So I don't see a lot of commercials, but I saw commercials while watching that, and I saw the commercial for Smile a lot. Like every commercial break, it felt like they were showing it. And that was the first time I heard about this movie. And I gotta say, but every time I do watch TV, I'm always shocked by what you can show on TV these days. I know I sound like an old man saying that, but like that trailer for Smile, like it freaked my daughter out. Like there's, I don't know if you've seen the shots that they show in the trailer, but there's a shot where this woman like walks up to a car door window and like her head's out of frame, and then like it rolls down. They show that on TV. I'm like, what the hell? Pretty freaky stuff.
Yeah, it's actually been very interesting to. I saw somebody say this. I can't remember where it was, Twitter or Facebook or Reddit or something, but they've been, and I don't even know if you heard that there was like that baseball tie-in where like in the crowd at Major League Baseball games, they had people just staring at these cameras, smiling. And the cameras just lingered on them, and they might have been wearing Smile shirts. I don't remember, but like to see a studio go this hard on a property that's not a sequel and not an IP, and also a horror movie, is actually really interesting because that's like three things they almost never really dedicate serious resources to, just because the assumption is it won't do well. But it was so weird to see just all of this hype and this tie-ins for it. So, I mean, I think
if you land that first entry, if that first entry makes a splash, you've got yourself a franchise that's going to last a decade, right? Look at the Saw movies. Look at the even that Ethan Hawke movie got a sequel.
Sinister.
Sinister, yes. If the first one's a hit, like I remember, I really liked The Conjuring. I was like, wow, this is the most original, like, best horror movies I've seen in a long time, and now there's like a Conjuring universe. There's like 6 movies in that universe.
More than that.
You see that first movie, it doesn't feel like it's launching a franchise, but if it makes money, there will be more.
Well, to be fair to that one a little bit, there's, the Warrens have a whole list of stuff you can go to and check out. But yeah, it's and Smile, I will say, is, I mean, I could easily see it being franchised. No spoilers or anything, but it's a concept that lends itself to continuing. Even if the end of the movie maybe implies otherwise. But, and it's just, speaking on that note, just for a while, it actually is so weird to me, though, that in this age of horror movies we've got, especially with like the high horror stuff that they talk about, or I forget what it's called. Elevated horror, sorry.
Elevated horror.
In all of that, Jason and Freddy have both still mostly been sitting everything out. I know there's some rights issues with some of it that kind of gets in the way, but it is interesting to me that Halloween did come roaring back is a pretty big deal with this kind of 3 films they've been doing here. But it's been interesting kind of seeing Jason and Freddy, arguably the other 2 kind of horror icons, sit it out. Even Hellraiser's getting another movie coming to Hulu soon. So even that franchise is kind of finding its way back to hopefully being a mildly prestige format thing. So you got to wonder if maybe Robert Englund's got one more in the tank. Maybe he's got his own salmon jacket that he can put on and fool us. But that's a deep cut for you wrestling fans.
That's nice. Will they return? Remains to be seen. But today, it's all about that second entry, A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, Freddy's Revenge, released November 1st, 1985, made on a budget of just $3 million. At the box office, it brings in $30 million. That's not a lot of money for a box office return, but when your budget's $3 million, hey, you've made a profit. That's why they make these horror movies, Andrew. Rotten Tomatoes, it has a critic score of just 40%. Keep in mind, being a movie of the 80s, that is just based on 30 reviews, but regardless, not well received by any means critically, and if you ask the audiences, even fans of the franchise, this one typically isn't ranking at the top of the Nightmare on Elm Street list.
Definitely not. Apparently, as opposed to the first movie, which, as I just looked, has a 95 on Rotten Tomatoes.
Wow.
It's probably one of, if not the highest rated slasher movie of all time. Granted, again, that's only 56 reviews, whereas something now would probably get 4 times that. But yeah, there has been some reevaluation of this one. We will probably talk about that a little bit more later. But yeah, this is still, even despite that, not one people are really going back to. It feels very... It ends up kind of being standalone, at least narratively, because as you get into, especially Volume 3, 4, and 4 especially, you go back to Nancy's character from the first one. So you kind of go back to the, what brought you to the table. You bring back those original characters and you try to build a legacy out. But this one is, it's kind of its own thing. It's Freddy is there and he's doing Freddy things, but the setup, the environment, even kind of Freddy's deal is very different here. And I feel like that kind of makes it an outlier to the franchise and one that people aren't quite looking back at.
The movie was written by David Chaskin. Now, not a ton of credits to the man's name, has done various things in filmmaking, from being an actor to behind the scenes, a little bit of editing, a little bit of writing, most of his credits being in the 80s and a few scattered after that. So couldn't find a lot on the guy, but I know there were multiple pitches made for a Nightmare on Elm Street sequel, and the pitch that he made, the one that we got here, is the one the studio went with and won out, so he got the job.
He, like you said, not a whole lot to his name. Probably the other high-profile thing after this was a movie called The Curse, which was actually an adaptation of the H.P. Lovecraft story, The Color Out of Space, which they actually just did another version of with Nicolas Cage. And David Keith directs The Curse, Daredevil's father in the 2003 film of the same name. But otherwise, not a whole lot to David Chaskin's credit.
Did you say David Keith? That guy's name is David Keith?
Yes, not to be confused with Keith David.
I definitely pictured Keith David whenever you said that. And then you said Daredevil's father.
I always have to double check.
And I was like, oh, wait a minute.
There's Keith David and there's David Keith. Not at all confusing. Not a whole lot of even some of his most recent credits are just appearances in Elm Street documentaries and things like that. So, not a whole lot to look into there.
The movie is directed by Jack Shoulder. Before this, directed the low-budget horror movie Alone in the Dark. No doubt, probably what led to him getting the nod here. And then after this, there's a few more directing credits in film. Does a lot of stuff on TV. Some notable credits including the Tremors TV show, as well as some episodes of Mortal Kombat Conquest. Does anyone remember this thing existing? This is the live-action Mortal Kombat TV show that came after that initial pair of movies. They didn't last very long, but it's out there.
No. I do want to shout out Alone in the Dark, just because that's a very strange movie to me, because it is directed by Jack Shoulder in his debut. That one is produced by Robert Shea, who is a producer on the Elm Street movies as well. So there's definitely a relationship connection there as to why you got the pick. But that movie stars Jack Palance, Martin Landau, and Donald Pleasance, which is three, first off, very old actors. But just, yes. And Donald Pleasance obviously has the Halloween credit at that point. But just the idea of Jack Palance and Martin Landau in a horror movie in the early 80s is just a very, it's tough for my brain to wrap itself around it. So I might have to give that one another watch back.
Andrew, you mentioned this movie has had a bit of a re-evaluation. It has a bit of a legacy, and this movie's legacy is that it is iconic in the queer horror community. This movie has a very clear gay subtext, and it's honestly not that subtle.
No, it is not.
It is pretty overt. I don't really see it getting by anybody. And I knew of this legacy before going in, and what I'm thinking is something like Top Gun, which that movie gets that label as well, but in a bit of a different way, because I feel like Top Gun, the homoerotic stuff is almost, it was not intended. I think scenes that were shot to be like cool guys bonding stuff, I think the gay overtones were unintentional, which makes it a little bit comedic to me.
Yeah.
I could be wrong about that. I haven't watched any documentaries on the making of that, but I don't think Top Gun was intended to be a homoerotic film like it kind of came out to be. But the undertones here are very much intentional. Now, you dig into it, it gets a little unclear as far as who is bringing that to the table. our lead actor is a gay man, and for a while sort of implied that the gay undertones were thrown into the movie almost as an attack at him, but has also said that they intentionally brought those gay undertones to the movie to kind of own it and bring a little bit of representation to the horror genre, which typically doesn't have a lot. It doesn't have a good track history with its gay characters. So it's a little unclear. It could be a little bit of this, a little bit of that, but the end result, there is absolutely a story being told here with our lead character's sexuality. And the movie is viewed very highly by, like I said, a lot of queer members of the horror community for representing some repressed sexuality in a teenager in a horror movie.
Yeah, the way that it's kind of been described is that Mark Patton's character here, Jesse, is basically the first male Scream Queen, as it's been described. And that's actually the name of the documentary that they kind of made about this film. And that subtext, it's called Scream Queen, My Nightmare on Elm Street. And Mark Patton's basically the lead character of that. And yeah, over the years, there's been a lot of different explanations. David Chaskin, apparently in the Never Sleep Again documentary, he said it was all intentional. Like it was not something that like they finished editing the movie and were like, whoops. Like it didn't sneak up on them or anything like that. But and then that led to turmoil with Patton, who at the time was not out. He is now and was when these later documentaries were made, but he was not at the time, and so he thought they were trying to sabotage him. And it led to a lot of tension there. But it seems more recently there's been like you said, a greater embrace of the film and I hesitate to call it subtext because it's really not very subtle what it's doing.
The only reason I would call it subtext is because the character of Jesse Walsh, I don't know. They never say that they're gay, and it's not like you have to say you're gay to be gay. Right. I get that, but they don't have. There's no male. He doesn't kiss another man and doesn't profess his romantic feelings towards another man in so many words. All the romance is directed at a female. You could say they're more of a bisexual character. I'm certainly not the one to judge that, but I would call it subtext simply because there is not, at the end of the day, there's not a gay relationship. It is simply the feelings are implied. But like you said, you could call it overt. You could say it's all right there. Like it's not getting by anybody, I don't think.
No. So it's been interesting to see it reevaluated and see it be appreciated in that way for those things that it was at the time, like you said, kind of trailblazing. Like you said, the horror genre, or even, I mean, really film at large's relationship with the LGBTQ plus community has not been stellar. I actually went to it was Grady Hendrix, that same author I just mentioned. He did a paperback release appearance in Chicago for the Final Girl support group. And it was he ends up doing a big, very funny, but very informative PowerPoint presentation on like some of the more troubling tropes of horror / slasher novels, which includes a lot of the gay person is the killer because they're gay. Like a lot of tropes like that, where it's a very negative stereotype or the killer turns out he's dresses like women because he's crazy, and that's the sort of thing. And it examined a lot of those tropes and where they came from. And it was actually super informative, and it's actually online. I highly recommend checking it out. But this was an instance where they were trying to put the character in the lead and have them be the hero of the film. And I think that is a powerful message that people want to hear, especially when you're looking at a legacy at that point that was less than stellar in regards to these communities. So,
well, Andrew, I think it's time we cross that threshold. All #positivity podcast from here on out about the movie A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge. Years after the supernatural attacks of Freddy Krueger, the Walsh family moves to Elm Street, in the house previously inhabited by a survivor of the previous movie's events. Strange occurrences begin happening in the house as the temperature seems to always be on the rise, and small fires begin to break out. Teenager Jesse Walsh is having nightmares about becoming Freddy Krueger. When the dreams start to feel increasingly real, Jesse fears for the lives of his friends, afraid that he will unwillingly kill them during one of his nightmares. Once Freddy takes full control of Jesse, it's up to Jesse's girlfriend Lisa to find a way to stop him. Andrew, you mentioned earlier that this movie does some different things with Freddy, and I was watching this movie and I was kind of second guessing. It's been a minute since I've watched the original, but like Freddy's powers and how they manifest, they're completely different in this movie than they were in the first one, right?
By and large, yeah. Like obviously the dream part is very, very similar, but it's the way it's approached is very different. Like in the first movie, Freddy is entering people's dreams mostly with the intent of killing them. Like Johnny Depp's very famous death on his bed that's Freddy entering his dream and killing him. That's how this is. In this instance, you're seeing Freddy essentially possess someone else to kill other people, which is not really how it worked to that point. And not just use that person to kill other people, but ultimately, as the finale of this film shows, re-enter the real world through that person, essentially. It's all stuff that we hadn't seen him do. In the first movie, he comes to the real world just because she's able to kind of grab him and pull him out. But it's a very... a lot of it's ripples to the character that had not been explored in the first film. And so it is, I guess you could say it's adding to his powers, but it definitely doesn't change the fact that like what Freddy actually is capable of doing is not particularly clear kind of throughout the whole franchise at that point. Like he's kind of that Deus Ex Machina where you can kind of like Freddy can really do whatever it is you need him to do for the sake of the story you're telling. And that's definitely something that they have embraced more often than not, especially in regards to the character and especially some of the later installments. But here especially, they're having him do things that like there's a straight up pretty nasty transformation scene where Jesse basically...
we're going to get to it.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about it.
It's
we're
gnarly, but it's not something you saw in the first one, but yeah.
Before we get to those scenes, we got to talk about the cast.
We do.
That's what we always do. We start with the casting, and of course, we're going to start with the high point, with the best casting and best performance of the film. Every episode, we recognize one person who goes above and beyond the call of duty with their performance, that they actually raise the quality of the entire film. We recognize that person by giving them the Mark Strong Award. Andrew, who is getting your Mark Strong Award for A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, Freddy's Revenge?
Well, Chris, I'm glad you asked. My Mark Strong for Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, Freddy's Revenge. I gotta go straight to the top. I'm giving it to Mark Patton as Jesse Walsh. He is, I mean, by the nature of the script, he's essentially given the most to do here, by and large. Freddy himself even is kind of in a very reduced role here, but Mark Patton is kind of put front and center as this kind of tormented character that's battling this thing that's seemingly inside of him and trying to still basically maintain his humanity through all of it. And he's given a lot of scenes. He is able to shine in those. The kind of torment that the character is facing comes through very clearly, especially as the movie kind of goes on and he gets more and more kind of manic as the movie goes through. I think he does a good job with it. So, I got to go straight to the top. Mark Patton is Jesse Walsh.
Excellent choice, Andrew. I do think they're doing a great job. And, man, Mark Patton, so good at sweating. Constantly so sweaty in this movie.
Whether it's because the house is so hot.
Well, it's because the house is so hot, or he is scared or running for his life. They're always coming up with reasons for this man to be absolutely drenched in sweat. Andrew, I'm gonna ask you a question, and you
Sure.
do not have to. You don't have to answer this if you don't want to. But how long in your life? How old were you when you were still wearing whitey tidy underwear?
I want to say by the age of 12, I had moved beyond those.
Okay, same. I don't know, probably around that age, somewhere between 8 and 12. I remember actually I was actually got like it was weird. I got like hand-me-down boxers from someone. Yeah, saying that out loud, I realize how weird
Yeah.
that is. But
It's very
no,
weird.
I remember my mom was like, "Oh, so and so gave this to us. You can try them on if you like these." And I was like, "Yeah, boxers. These are cool." And that's what I switched to. Then eventually, if anybody's curious, I switched to boxer briefs. I like the gentle hug all over my bottom half is what I like these days. But my point is here, Andrew, that I associate tidy whities with kids,
Yeah.
with being a child. With,
Yeah.
you've got like the Disney prints when you're like 4 and 5 years old. And then you grow up a little bit and you get like the plain white ones. And then eventually you're gonna find a different kind of underwear to wear. But anytime in movies, high schoolers, adults, if you got to see them with underwear, so often they're wearing tidy whities, which is always a little bit unintentionally funny to me because, again, they're wearing like big boy underwear.
Yeah, it's a little strange.
So you see Mark Patton and his tidy whities a lot, sweating a lot, doing his thing. And no, I agree with you. It's a great performance. I mean, he is the final girl of this film. And I use the term final girl as the traditional term for the last teenage survivor of a horror film, which 99% of the time, it is a girl. This might be the first instance where it's not. Historians can correct me on that. But again, a bit of the trailblazing of this movie, not just for what it's doing for representation, but the fact that it's just a male lead. Like, it's not very often where you can be like, wow, they're brave for pitting a man in the role. But in this case,
Yeah,
it
was,
is a
it was
little
bucking
bit
the
different.
trend at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting flip on it. They're actually, and it's actually interesting to me too that, like, by and large, most of the leads survive this movie. That
Yeah.
like like there's obviously our lead is Mark Patton, but a lot of his like immediate circle, most of them survive too, outside the weird kind of end scene that all these movies have where you're not really sure if it's really happening or not. But yeah, it's so it's kind of interesting in that regard too, because like almost all of them survive. The body count in this movie is actually probably pretty low compared to some of its competitors. But yeah, having him be the lead was definitely a as odd as it may seem, a bit of a flip of the script at that point.
Well, for my Mark Strong Award, it is actually going to go out to someone that does not survive the film. My Mark Strong Award is going to Robert Russler as Mark's best friend. ... Ron Grady. I really like this performance. I think it's a lot of fun. I think what he's doing as Ron Grady is almost just like he's always too cool for the situation at hand. There's this scene where they're like all at lunch together at school, and Jesse is like freaking out because he's been having all this stuff happen to him, and he's being kind of rude to everybody. And the entire scene, Grady has a mouthful of food. Like, his cheek is bulging because he's chewing so much. And he's like, "What are you even talking about?" And then he's like, fed up with him being a jerk. He's like, "All right, well, I'll see you later." And he like walks off, like still chewing like Brad Pitt does in all his movies, just chewing throughout the entire scene. And I gotta imagine like Robert was, using the spit bucket so much because he's taking such big bites during that scene. But I just thought it was a real fun choice, and he's always Grady is he's just a cool dude throughout that I really liked, and he's got a we're getting to it. We're getting to that transformation scene, but whenever during that scene, whenever Jesse comes over and he's kind of freaking out, and he's talking about, he's all sweaty and talking about what happens to him. Grady just says this great line, "Hey man, what the fuck's wrong with you, dude?" And I love like how matter of fact it is. Yeah, absolutely. Like if I was in that situation, that's probably exactly how I would react to this crazy stuff going on. Like, oh, hold up, dude, what are you talking about? Yeah. So I really liked the casual nature of this character. I get why Jesse wants to be friends with him because he's so damn cool.
He's cool, man.
This is the character for the gay subtext. This is who you could argue Jesse is truly in love with versus Lisa, because Grady is the one that he is confiding in, even whenever he can't open up to Lisa.
Yeah, that's actually one of the key sequences that people point to, is that in the moment where he feels like the transformation is coming on and he's scared, he doesn't seek the refuge of the girl who was just previously trying to jump his bones. He runs to his male best friend. And you could also say that that's just an example of some non-toxic masculinity where we seek refuge in those that we know. But the movie itself, it kind of built up that Lisa was a more compassionate companion in all of this, but he seeks out Grady instead, and that's like you said, or Ron, I think his actual name is. And
they call him Grady throughout the movie.
I think that's his last name. But yeah, it's an interesting sequence, and that whole, like I said, we'll talk about that sequence in a bit. But yeah, it's that alone makes it a good performance. But I agree completely. He's stepping it up. He's taking that role of kind of like a very stereotypical type role and elevating it immensely with what he's doing here. So great pick.
Now, Andrew, I have not seen every movie in the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. I have seen the original. I have seen New Nightmare, which I think was actually on your recommendation, because it's kind of divorced from the continuity. You can kind of jump straight to it after the first one, and it does a lot of interesting, unique stuff. I really enjoyed it. But as far as seeing them beginning to end, I think that's about it until I watched part 2 this week preparing for this podcast. And if I were to have guessed before watching the entire franchise, I would have been like, what is there, 6 mainline movies?
6, yeah.
I would have been like, okay, there's 6 movies. That's 6 Mark Strong awards for Robert Englund, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
you would think.
The appeal, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not the biggest expert on this particular franchise, but I think the appeal of the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise is unlike the other big 2 in the slasher genre. You got Michael Myers and Jason and a lot of other slashers beyond that. It's like there's not a lot of personality to the killer. The fear is that like they have almost ambiguous motivation and they're unstoppable and they look menacing. But Freddy Krueger has tons of personality and he's goofy and he's silly and he torments his killers, and like that's what sets the series apart from other slashers. Do you think that's a pretty accurate assessment?
I think that's a very accurate assessment. I think you're dealing with a situation where, like you said, even you take something like, say, Pinhead, which was played by Doug Bradley for a long time. That character still doesn't really have a lot of personality. So even instances where you do get a particular person still doing the through line performance, Freddy kind of stands alone in that this character talks, and he actually kind of has these things that he does, and it seems weird for that to basically be like, oh, he actually gets to act as the character, being why it has a legacy, but it kind of is, because like you said, with Jason, there's 6-7 different Jasons at this point. There's 6-7 different Michael Myers. There's one Freddy Krueger. Yes, there is a reboot where he's played by somebody else, but we know who Freddy Krueger is. That's, you see Robert Englund, he's Freddy Krueger. That's plain and simple. There's no question there. And I think obviously the fact that this one is also more overtly supernatural and gets to lean into the fantasy side a bit more, I think that also makes it a little bit more unique versus kind of Freddy and Michael, which are kind of, or not Freddy and Michael, but Jason and Michael, who are kind of, at least at the beginning, just unstoppable for no real reason. Whereas with Freddy, you kind of given this reason why he can kind of keep coming back and it leads to just some unique scenarios. But I think that Robert Englund performance as Freddy Krueger is top of the list, absolutely, as far as the legacy of this, which makes it all the more interesting how little he's in this movie.
Yeah, so neither one of us are giving him the Mark Strong Award for this particular entry, but it's not because he's not great in the role. I just want to make that clear.
Right, of course.
We get so little of it. He's got so little dialogue. He gets to show so little of that personality. You know, the focus is it's just elsewhere. This movie does not have a long running time. It's less than 90 minutes, but very little of it is spent delving into the personality and the wackiness of Freddy Krueger. He makes the most of it, though. You get a few lines. You get that line I used in the beginning where he appears at the pool party and someone's trying to like reason with him, like, "Hey, I'm here to help you," and he says, "You know, help yourself, effer." And it's pretty funny. It's classic Freddy Krueger type stuff. But we just get so little of it. So it's not that Robert Englund is doing any less of a good performance here. There's just not really enough for me to say that what he's doing is elevating the film.
Right. There's just not a lot of it. I think that transformation sequence, which again, we will talk about soon.
We'll get there.
I don't think that comes until after an hour into the movie, which means there's like only 15 or 20 minutes of the movie left. And like until that, almost everything with Freddy is obscured. It's like very atmospheric. Like there's not a lot of dialogue. There's a couple of face-offs with Jesse and Freddy where he kind of makes his intentions, such as they are, clear. But by and large, he sits out almost the entirety of the first two acts of this movie. And yeah, it's not that Freddy Krueger or Robert Englund as Freddy Krueger is not great. That is something that gets kind of ratcheted up as the series goes on, is kind of goofiness. And then there's definitely movies where it feels more like he's a cartoon character than a killer, which is kind of the joke of New Nightmare, is that they're making him scary again. But this has still got a pretty good balance. There's still just as much menacing as there is kind of goofiness. And there's just not a lot of it. It's an interesting dichotomy or an interesting approach to take. But that kind of is in line with the first one. I mean, in the first one, they're very particular about the usage of Freddy, and this one is mostly continuing that. But it is kind of interesting that for a movie about the lead character being possessed by Freddy, essentially, how little he's ultimately in the movie.
I think it's telling on the part of our filmmakers here that originally they did not bring Robert Englund back. They were like, Freddy is the star. You can put anybody in that makeup. So to save money, they just threw the Freddy makeup on a stunt performer. But once they saw them in their footage, like, wait a minute, there's more of a performance to this than just a guy in makeup. So they did, of course, bring Robert Englund back. And there is a small part of the movie during the shower kill where it's not Robert Englund. It is that stunt performer they were going to try to use that actually made it to the final cut of the movie. But it's crazy to think about because the franchise is defined by Robert Englund's performance as Freddy Krueger, and for part 2 they tried to make it without him.
Even more interesting is that Robert Englund was not originally cast as Freddy Krueger at all. It was, believe it or not, David Warner.
Who is David Warner?
Professor Jordan Perry from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2.
Wow.
He was also in The Omen, more notably as a horror film he was in. But there's like test makeup shot, like photos of him in the test makeup and everything, as Freddy Krueger. And so he would have been. That's one of those weird what ifs for me, because that very well, David Warner's version of that character very well could have been something where David Warner was like, I'm not coming back and doing this again. I've got no desire to do that. And it could have turned into a anybody is under the makeup, or even a Kane Hodder situation where somebody comes in later to the franchise and kind of makes it their own and kind of becomes that. But yeah, it's a heck of a thing that Freddy Krueger almost doesn't become, or Robert Englund at least. I mean, he'd still endlessly be associated with that first movie. No confusion there. But definitely a studio decision to be like, we don't need him. But apparently the
imagine Robert Englund and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2.
That almost, maybe. Who knows?
All right, we actually have a pretty tight cast here. There's not a lot to go through, but a few key players. We have Kim Myers as Lisa Weber. This is Jesse's, I keep saying girlfriend. It's really like they like each other. That's made clear. At least she makes it pretty overt that she's into him. And it's kind of unrequited for a long time. Again, all that subtext. But they do end up together. But the relationship forms over the course of the movie. But she's definitely the love interest of the movie. And I like this character a lot because even though, Jessie Walsh ends up being what I called the final girl, really it's Lisa that reads Nancy's diary and learns like how Freddy Krueger works and where he gets his power, and she's ultimately the one that defeats him to save Jessie in the end. So again, talking about trailblazing, bucking the trend, we've got a female lead that defeats the hero rather than just survive, and then we've got a male in the role that's just barely surviving the final attack. So doing some cool stuff in the script there that I appreciate.
Yeah, we get a bit of the Ghostbusters ending where she defeats Freddy and he like peels off the crusty exterior and reveals that he's still alive underneath. But yeah, it was an interesting little flip. She's the one that kind of does the legwork, and she, like you said, she has the final showdown with Freddy, and no less like runs to it, which I like too. Like she knows what's going on and she runs towards the danger, which is very cool. So she gets to jump in on this action a lot. Ultimately, it is her feelings for Jessie that play a big part in Jessie being able to kind of break Freddy's hold on him. So we think. But yeah, otherwise, it's a great performance. Don't know Kim Myers from a whole lot of else. She does have an appearance in Hellraiser 4, which is oddly the Hellraiser in space movie. So she, and then a bunch of TV credits to her name but nothing in the a few things showing up around, but overall not a whole lot. But she's making the most of what she's got here.
Clu Gulager plays Ken Walsh. This is Jessie's dad, and not a lot to say here, but I love how dad this performance is. Yeah, so he's a bit of a jerk.
He's a huge
but
jerk.
I love just the little things like, they can't, the temperature keeps going up in the house and they're complaining about the AC. It's like, oh, it's not broken. It just needs a shot of Freon as he's sitting on his lazy boy reading a newspaper. Just really classic dad type stuff. Whenever Jessie's acting strange, she's like, he needs a kick in the ass. Or he needs to go to the methadone clinic, implying that
he's
Jessie's
addicted to something. Yeah,
heroin. Yeah, but it's very much like Red from that '70s show kind of dad. A little more mean than funny, like you said. He's not too likable, but weird stuff happens in the house. Like the birds get possessed and the toaster lights on fire, and he's always like, "Huh." That's a heck of a thing, isn't it?
Yeah. This is wild.
It's just fun.
Yeah, he's he plays the dad that just kind of refuses to see what's in front of his eyes in multiple ways. And Clu Gulager is, I mean, he's got credits dating back to the 60s and the 50s on television. He was a legendary character actor that had shown up in all sorts of places, showed up in a few horror movies after this, pretty much up until he passed away or just earlier this year, just about 2 months ago. He passed away, 93. So, I mean, that's a heck of a run. And he showed up in a whole lot of places. But his role here is basically just to be the daddest dad possible. And he handles that just fine.
R.I.P. Clu, and R.I.P. Hope Lang, who plays Cheryl Walsh, Jessie's mom. And just like he's playing that classic suburban dad, she's playing the mom. She's a little bit more sensitive to kids' needs and kind of puts up with the dad's antics. Friend of the show, my wife, watched about half this movie before she decided it was time to go off to bed. But she did make a remark about her character here, Cheryl. She's like, that mom, she can get it. I agree. Good looking mom.
Definitely. I seen Hope in a couple of other things. She was in the original Death Wish. Was also had a bit part in David Lynch's Blue Velvet. So that of course means I've seen her in something else because I've seen everything David Lynch has done. But like I said, playing the more compassionate of the parents and a little bit more receptive that something weird is going on, but still kind of defaulting to her husband. But yeah, good stuff.
But speaking of mean characters, lastly, we have Marshall Bell playing Coach Schneider. And he's like the...
He's
What's his name in
every
The Breakfast
stereotypical... He's like the principal in the Breakfast Club?
Yeah, he's like the principal in the Breakfast Club. That's just... He just... Like, why do you work with kids? You clearly hate them.
Clearly
like,
hate them, yeah.
You clearly just want them to be miserable. So he's their PE coach, and he's just always making them do push-ups because they're slacking off. And it's even applied that he puts them through this because he enjoys it more than he should. Like, he's on the verge of becoming the next Freddy Krueger with some of the stuff that they imply. And he's I guess one of the parts of this movie where the gay subtext isn't subtext at all, because he is simply at a gay bar. Jesse finds him there, and then I guess, like, as punishment, he takes him back to the school and makes him, like, run laps because he doesn't, want that to get out, I guess. But this movie's so weird.
It's a very weird movie. Like, that was honestly my first thought when it was over. So I was like, what a strange movie. Like, just
what a weird thing. But he's a mean coach.
I mean, that's his role here. He's one of our more overt graphic murders of the film. Basically, in a weird sense of almost vigilante justice, when Jesse has been punished and is finally sent to the showers. The implication here is that the Freddy possession takes over and kind of kills this guy for just being awful. Like, he's one of those guys that Freddy kills, and you're kind of like, well, this dude was definitely questionable at best. So you might have been doing us a favor here. But Marshall Bell is he's another character actor. I remember him probably notably for Total Recall, where he plays the host for Quado. He plays that guy there. I remember him from tons of just bit little things. You've probably seen him in a ton of other stuff. I remember from a movie I watched called Hamlet 2, which is a weird movie about a sequel to Hamlet. But Starship Troopers, he's all over the place. This is one of his early roles. I think this was only his third movie, I think, or his third appearance. But his job is to play the mean coach and die, and he does both of those just fine. I do have one last shout out, if you don't mind.
Go for it.
This is literally like a blink and I missed it kind of thing. But Ron's dad is played by Lyman Ward. And Lyman Ward is notably known by most people probably as Ferris Bueller's dad. And he's just like, he's literally, I think his only scene is where he's on the other side of the door while Freddy is killing his son. I think that's it. I think that's literally his only scene in the whole movie. But I was just like, is that really? And yep, turns out it's him.
I just clicked over to his filmography. Also, Andrew, do you know that they're in Independence Day? They are a Secret Service agent, so I couldn't really tell you exactly who they are there.
Definitely not.
And then Mr. Weiler in Not Another Teen Movie. I'd have to rewatch that to find him there, but
that makes sense that he'd be there, just because I could see Ferris Bueller being a joke that they reference.
Yeah,
but yeah, that's fun.
Good shout out, Andrew. But now it's time to jump into the scenes of this film, specifically the best scenes, the scenes we enjoyed the most, at least our favorite. So let's start it off with our favorite scene of the movie. Andrew, in your opinion, when is this movie firing on all cylinders? What is your favorite scene of the movie? I feel like we're just going to agree on the scene because we keep wanting to talk about it. But go ahead, kick us off. What's your favorite scene in the movie?
There's to be fair, there's two or three scenes that when I really thought back on, I was like, what sticks out to me? And there were a couple, but you can't go around. It's the transformation sequence. It's the transformation sequence.
Yes. So cool. Yep.
In Ron's bedroom, where the implied transformations suddenly don't become implied, and you witness Jesse full on like transform / act as the gateway for Freddy Krueger to enter into our world. And it is gnarly. It's it is a heck of a
This
thing.
has to be, it's a $3 million movie. So much of that budget has to be in this scene here.
Absolutely. I mean, this is there is a lot going on here, a lot of things that have to be at play, and there is just some really wild special effects happening here, more so than the other ones, definitely. So it is not just a transformation, it's like drawn out. Like it is prolonged, his transformation. And then he goes back immediately, so that's convenient. But yeah, this sequence is just, it's brutal. It's nasty. It's kind of tough to look away from at the same time, like, because you're just watching piece by piece of this thing happen. Like, I remember watching it even when I was younger, and the part of like the claws coming out of his fingers just sticks in my brain, where I was just like, oh, like a very not cool Lady Deathstrike thing, but just so weird and gnarly. But yeah, and then eventually Freddy just like bursts out of the dude's stomach, and it is insane. Whoever conceived / birthed, see what I did there, folks?
I got it.
This sequence deserves a lot of credit, because it is, I would say it's one of the most visually memorable sequences probably from the whole franchise.
Yeah, that's why I gotta say it's the best scene in the movie, because it's just unlike anything else we get at this franchise. I haven't seen them all, but from what I've seen, there's nothing quite like this. I mean, you mentioned like the glove, the clawed hands, but breaking through Jesse's arm, ripping out of his chest. I love at one point Jesse like opens his mouth and the camera goes in, and there's an eyeball in the back of his throat, like looking left and right, like Freddy's eyeball. It's just some really sick stuff and very 80s stuff. I mean, whenever he is full on ripping through his chest to get out, you can see like it's no longer, Jesse's head is no longer actually Mark Patton. It's like a dummy head. You can tell in that classic 80s way, but it doesn't look any less gnarly. If anything, like I just super appreciate like all the work that went into this transformation sequence. I mean, they knew like this was the money scene of the movie. And we mentioned already, it kind of gets set up because he is making out with Lisa. They're getting hot and heavy, and he feels the transformation coming on because his tongue gets all long and gross. But he doesn't tell her what's going on. He runs off.
Nope.
He runs to Grady's house, and he's trying to explain to Grady what's going on. And he's like, "You don't understand. Someone's trying to get inside me." And Grady says, "Yeah, and she's female, and she's waiting for you in the cabana, and you want to sleep with me." And again, it's one of those, it's not subtext. Like, he means sleep with me because he wants to sleep in the same room, but come on. They knew what they were doing there. They know exactly what's going on there. So,
yep.
But yeah, that actual transformation, it sucks that Grady has to die. It's my favorite character in the movie, but what a way to go after that gnarly transformation. If you're going to go out, I don't know. That's about as cool of a scene as you can go out in.
It is. I mean, like I said, it's the high point of the film, and it stands out because this isn't meant to be backhanded, but it's just there's not a lot of sequences that have this amount of creativity and energy put into them. There's a lot of effective sequences that mostly use a lot more, I'll say, subtle things, like with the sequence in the shower. I think how Jesse just becomes Freddy as like the steam envelops the room and he just kind of emerges from the steam as Freddy. I think it's tremendously effective, but not a particularly difficult thing to pull off. All you have to do is create the steam. I think that one worked really well in that moment, but by and large, it's not nearly as involved as this one is. So I think this stands on its own, if only for that reason.
Speaking of memorable shots, though, after this, we got Freddy in the real world, and he goes to that pool party. There is a pretty subtly awesome special effects shot where Freddy breaks through a glass door. He runs and he jumps through this glass door, and it shatters into a bunch of pieces. And then Freddy mid-air disappears. Like, we see him disappear on screen. But, like, I'm not quite sure how they shot that, because they had to have had someone going through this door to make it break. So you feel like they shot him jumping through the door, but then I don't know how they make him disappear this
while
was
the
a
door
modern
is still
shot, it
breaking,
would-
basically. Like,
Yeah, exactly. And, like, there's the debris like covering him up, so it's not so easy to like splice him into that footage. I'm not sure exactly how they did it, but it was memorable for that reason. I thought it was pretty cool. And this, this pool scene is kind of where we get the most of Freddy's personality, like we're talking about earlier, kind of taunting these kids and
yeah,
getting a few kills in before Lisa comes in, confronts him.
yeah, it's the Superman 3 shot all over again, where we're gonna have to go back and analyze the tape
Yeah.
like shot by shot to see when the cut is, because it's somewhere. But yeah, this is basically when Freddy kind of emerges, because even after that sequence where he kills Ron, he still changes back, and it's when he's back at Lisa's house that he transforms again, and we get a much more subtle transformation this time. And then that's what leads to the pool party, and he's basically Freddy through the rest of the movie at that point. From when he transforms at her house to the pool party and on, that's it, the transformation has taken hold at that point. But yeah, there's a lot of cool. This, like I said, this is the most Freddy, but that door shot in particular is really impressive. It's one of those sequences where you're stopping and thinking about it way more than you ever would have thought you would for a movie like this. But yeah, pool party is where you're getting the most of Freddy, so if that's your thing, this sequence probably stands out. But that transformation just sets all this up, and it's so gnarly.
You know what the most relatable part of this movie is for me? It's the very beginning when they're on the school bus, and it turns out to be a dream, but Freddy's the driver, and he drives the bus off the road, and they end up like in the desert. They're on the bus, and they're scared, and they're desperately trying to roll down the school bus window, and
It won't
can't.
move.
Because those things were so hard to get down. It's like the clip on either side, but it's super narrow. You can only get one finger on it, and you push in, but like it hurts the tip of your finger. You always need to like partner up with a friend. Like, okay, I push this clip, you push that clip, and then someone needs to pull down while we're pushing. And they get down like half an inch, and then it jams. Like, oh, they were horrible. I had thought about those in like over 20 years, and then I saw that scene, and I was like, "Oh yeah, those things are awful."
Bringing back all those painful memories. You could have made a killing in school just being like the A team that gets down school bus windows. If you have a
$3
problem and no one else can open this window, and if you could find them, maybe you can hire the A team. But yeah, I do like this sequence a lot, and for a while I actually thought it was going to be my like high point of the movie, just because I think it is very effective at setting up that sense of dread, and that foreboding sense of kind of doom that kind of comes with Freddy. Like throughout the sequence, it's just getting creepier and creepier. And I will say Mark Patton looks a little creepy in this sequence. But
I didn't even realize it was the same character. It was my first time
Right.
watching this movie, and like he's on the school bus, and then we see him, as Jesse later on, and it took me a minute to be like, oh, that was his dream. That was him on the bus. He combed his hair differently or something. He looks very weird.
It is very weird, but and I actually like this sequence too, because the driver originally just appears as Robert Englund, outside the makeup. When you first see the driver in this sequence at the beginning of the movie, when he's like letting somebody on the bus, it's Robert Englund. So if you're a fan or clued in, you know what's going to be happening here. But apparently, they tried to do this as the ending sequence to the previous film, having Robert Englund show up as the driver. But Wes Craven apparently was very against that, and wanted that first movie to feel self-contained in a way, and didn't want you to kind of do that ending where it was like, but not really, even though it still kind of does.
I was gonna say he pulls the mom through the window, front door that is
so
clearly
it's not
like a
much better.
blow-up doll.
But so the compromise apparently was that they would use that sequence in the sequel and not involve any of the characters from the first movie. So he was like, you can use that sequence, but don't do it in my movie and not with any of my characters. So that was still pretty cool and effective. I always like those little Easter eggs. I think it's fun just when, like, you kind of have a little bit of the nudge, nudge, wink, wink, especially at the time. Because, like, how many people at the time would have really been super familiar with what Robert Englund even looked like? That's the other thing that's weird to me to think about. Like, we all know who Robert Englund is now, and especially now, even younger fans would have seen him on, like, the latest season of Stranger Things or things like that, where he's kind of just, he's Robert Englund at this point. Everybody knows who he is, but like when Nightmare on Elm Street 2 came out, like, did anybody know who Robert Englund was? Did anybody care? Yeah. And so it's always interesting to think about that, there was a time where these weren't franchises. I mean, this is only the second movie. I would hesitate to call it a franchise at all at that point. But nowadays, if Robert Englund shows up in something, everybody's just Leo pointing at the screen and going, "Boop, boop, 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 there he is." We all know who he is now. So
it's one of the few sequences, that bus sequence, where we are in the dream world. We don't get a lot of that in this movie, but they make the most of it when we do, because when it ends up in the desert and then like the ground falls away and it's just like balancing on a high stack of rocks, very cool, very like Beetlejuice-esque special effects that I really appreciated. This movie is very 80s, and of course it came out in the middle of the 80s, but those type of special effects definitely make me think that. Also the fact that we have clearly 20-somethings playing high schoolers, which I know like still happens, but like it was so rampant in the 80s, and they are obsessed with sex. Like I know like all teens kind of are, but like whenever Lisa's friend asked her, like, well, are you getting any? And then like 2 minutes later, Grady asked Jesse, are you mounting her nightly or what? Like, who
Jesus Christ
talks like this?
Jesus
Teens
Christ.
And 80s movies, that too.
Yeah,
Jesus
that's exactly
Christ.
it. No, yeah, it's a lot of horn dogs.
A lot of horn dogs. They do the classic, like, parents walk in on you doing something super awkward, and the path to get there. Like, Jesse finally decides he's, like, gonna unpack, right? So he's finally unpacking his room, and he's playing music, and that makes him, like, want to dance and hop on his bed. And then he grabs a toy cork gun, and he's holding it between his legs, bouncing, and then while it's between his legs, he shoots it as his mom walks in with Lisa. It's like his mom walks in, and then it's just like, as the cork pops.
Yep. Oh my God.
I mean, that would be embarrassing, to be fair.
It would be.
I would not want to be seen doing that. I don't know why I'm doing that, but I don't want anybody to see me doing that.
Because, like, he takes a box of things and he puts it in a drawer and he's like, huh, you like that, Dad? And I'm just like, yes. He wanted you to take the things out of the boxes and put them away. And then he's like putting his clothes and he's just putting them in the drawer, but it's kind of messy. But he's acting like this is some huge rebellious thing where I'm like, no, you're literally doing the thing he asked you to do. I don't understand why you think this is some sort of statement. But and then he's dancing like the whole time to some like female 80s pop song, and he's like closing drawers with his butt and stuff, like just hitting them. And it's like it's another sequence where you could say the subtext fades into just straight up on the screen.
Yeah, I gotta agree with that. Speaking of that dad, another thing I love about this dad, other than all the dadisms, is there's that scene where like the birds get possessed and they fly around and they attack them and then they burst into flame. It's very weird. But at one point, a bird flies by the dad's face and like scratches his cheek a little bit. He gets a little nick right underneath his cheekbone. And then the rest of the movie, the dad has a big bandage on his cheek. Like days and days go by, but he's got that little bitty scratch bandaged up the rest of the movie, which I thought was pretty funny.
I liked in that sequence one part like the bird is out and he just goes, "Damn bird!" And like just like while he's like flailing around his bedroom at this bird that just going crazy. And it just was super super funny to me for some reason. Also, Jesse's bedroom has a sign on the door that says "No out of town chicks." I don't know what this means. I don't know what kind of reference that's making. I don't understand, but it does.
If you know why someone would have a sign that says "No out of town chicks," let us know, because that is certainly not a reference. I don't get the joke. I don't get the reference. I don't know.
I don't either.
Exists. If you know, please let us know.
I also love that his stay awake pills are literally called Stay Up without awake. The Y. It's STA up because, that makes it sound more like a medication. I have so many weird notes here that I'm just like, One
It's
of
a
the
weird
ones
movie.
one of the ones is right when they're having that party at the end, and they're having it at Lisa's house, and her parents like turn out the lights, and the kids all assume this means they can now throw a rager. And like, so literally the parents are upstairs in the bedroom, have just turned out their lights, and then they like crank up the music and start yelling. And I'm like, my
roll
note is
out all the
literally,
beer in the wagon.
my note is literally, those parents are still up there, morons. Like they're not like, they didn't just teleport to dreamland. Like, to be fair, the movie like does have them go like, it shows them like immediately and has them go, what are they doing down there? And I'm like, okay, at least you acknowledge that your parents turning out their bedroom light doesn't suddenly mean they're deaf. Like,
You know, another special effects, we're talking about the special effects shots that we like, but another really gnarly one that actually comes pretty early in the movie is one of the first times Freddy comes face to face with with Jesse. And he says, he basically tells him that he wants to take over his body. And he says, you've got the body, I've got the brains. And he takes off his hat, and then he rips off his scalp, and you see his brain exposed, and then his brain is like pulsing. Man,
cool.
It's good stuff.
That is good stuff.
I typically don't think of slasher movies as scary. Like, I know they're horror movies and unsettling to a lot of people. I'm not denying that. But, like, for me, I almost, other than, like, maybe some jump scares, I don't really think of them as things that are going to make me,
uncomfortable,
be scared to turn off the lights when I go to bed that night, right? But this movie gets one pretty creepy scene, in my opinion. And so whenever Jesse is wandering the house because he can't sleep, and he hears singing in one of the rooms upstairs, and he walks in, and there's a little girl jumping rope, and she's singing the 1-2 Freddy Will Come From You song. And what's creepy about it is that she's moving in slow motion, but he's not. It's just very surreal, like, this girl is clearly not supposed to be here feeling. Plus the song is, a little girl singing a song about Freddy Krueger's creepy. But that's probably the most, unnerving part of this movie. Because, again, really slashers, in my opinion, don't really go for that type of horror typically.
Yeah, I agree. There's some that definitely get there, but that sequence in particular just feels very but yeah, it's effective. It's good at doing its job. There is a sequence, like we mentioned it before. There's a sequence where Jesse goes to like a gay bar, like during one of his like sleepless nights where he's kind of out wandering, and he goes to this. I don't know if it's a gay bar, maybe it's an S&M type bar. It's where he runs into his coach of all things. But he gets a beer, and there's no question from the bartender as to whether he could drink it or not. There's nobody's carding anybody here. But he hands him this beer in a bottle, and then he also gives him like a whiskey glass. So like, I guess put the beer in, like, and I'm like, I've never ever seen anybody do that with a beer. Like if you get like one of the tumblers or something with like your 12-ounce tumblers, you put the beer in, but like never seen somebody give somebody a small like whiskey glass to drink a beer with. So strange.
And he does. He pours it into the glass. I'm like,
and then the coach shows up. But
yeah, that was interesting.
But yeah, and then I also do like there's a sequence where Jesse, it's kind of after he has one of his blow-ups and he runs outside and he's going to leave with his car that doesn't start with a key. That's another like gag throughout the movie, is that his car doesn't start with a key. He like pushes 2 different buttons, and Lisa's kind of like, aren't you worried about somebody stealing your car? And he's basically like, what, the aged dinosaur? I'm guessing thinking that because his car is a piece of junk, no one would take it. And you know what, Jesse? That's just irresponsible.
I like his car. It's like a convertible.
Yeah. It just doesn't start with a key, apparently. But so this is his dad's up on a ladder, like taking the bars off the windows and stuff. But the outfit that he's wearing is tremendous to me, because it's like boots, but with socks like pulled up his calves, and then wearing these like plaid shorts with a polo shirt and then like a fisherman's cap. Like it's the oddest It's like he literally told somebody to pick all of his clothes at random, and then he wore them
like
to work on his house, no less. Like
it's all very dad things, but like from different dad outfits,
right?
Just
like,
jumbled together.
Exactly. Like this guy looks like his footwear is to work on the house. His shorts are to go golfing. His shirt is for going to work. Like it's like, dude, what are you doing? Dedicate to your activity here.
Yeah, I don't know, Andrew. It's a weird one.
It is.
I mean, the legacy of this movie, I will genuinely say, I think is important. I can only speak on it so much because obviously it's not
that's not
a
that's
community
not our
that I'm personally in, but I like seeing that this movie means so much to so many, and for the reasons that it does. And I think that that alone makes this movie important. I mean, it's not often that movies we talk about on this show have that type of legacy, like that important of a legacy, and it's pretty cool. I'll say, you know, all in all, we say this a million times. We're not trying to convince you the movies we cover are secretly masterpieces. I certainly wouldn't call this movie a masterpiece. Legacy and representation aside, there's a few key scenes that really stood out to me, and a lot of stuff that really didn't. But the stuff that matters, the stuff that works, genuinely and really, truly works.
I agree. I think there is some interesting ripples to the mythology. Like you said, the legacy being its own thing, I think is worth investigating it, if only to kind of see that at play. And yeah, I like I said, I'm not going to tell you that this is the unsung gem of the franchise, but I think it's become important to a lot of people, and there are definitely some great special effects shots that are very effective, and I think those are things to investigate for sure.
Well, there it is, Andrew. We have talked Friday the 13th with Jason X. We have talked A Nightmare on Elm Street this week with A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2. That means only one thing, Andrew. Next week, Freddy versus Jason. It's been leading to this. We're going to jump into the big crossover film next week on Best of the Rest. But for now, it's time for Question of the Week. And this one I find to be a little bit appropriate for our particular movie this month. This question comes from Oculus Neko in our Discord. And follow me on this, Andrew. Here's the question as written.
Okay.
Which movie could we change the ending to make it into an "it was all a dream" finale, where the main character wakes up and realizes none of it was real, but with the dream ending, you would still consider it an amazing film? And which movie that you currently love would be ruined for you if it was changed to having a dream ending? Wow.
That is a very involved question.
It is. So, I mean, we're familiar with the concept of dream endings, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's none of this really happened. Most of the time I'm thinking of like TV shows.
Newhart is probably the most notable example where the end of that show was the revelation that entire show was a dream that that Bob Newhart's character on his previous show had. That was kind of one of the first big reveals of like the dream ending, where like the whole thing as you saw it wasn't what you thought. So television gets a lot more of your St. Elsewhere had another, that was the very famous snow globe ending where like the last episode is the hospital and they pan back and it's some kid looking at a snow globe and like was the whole show just in this kid's head, like stuff like that. So television tends to do that a lot more.
And they do it for bottle episodes a lot too. Like I remember an episode of Power Rangers where it's the Black Ranger, who I think was Zach at the time, is like captured by the bad guys, and they're in like this machine, and they're like, you have to choose someone to fight this monster. And he says, man, what would Tommy do? And they go, you have chosen Tommy. And then like he has to watch Tommy fight this monster and get his ass kicked. And then he wakes up and it was all a dream, and he's like asleep at the school. I don't know why I remember that particular episode so vividly, but that one stuck with me.
It's a very, it happens a lot in like one-offs. Like you'll definitely have like, I think Dallas did an ending like that where there was some cliffhanger that like boxed them into a corner. And so the revelation of the next episode was that it was all a dream by one of the characters and didn't actually happen. So it's definitely a trope, especially in television. Man, I'm trying to think of like I think a lot of movies would like be hurt by the revelation that none of it actually happened. Like I think you could take almost any movie, and if like the end of the movie is just, and then they wake up, it's like, okay, well, like, you know, something like, you know, Old School or something like that. It's like, you know, what does it gain from revealing that, oh, it was all a dream? It's like, okay, why did I just watch this then? Like it's, there's a lot of things I think would not be helped by it, but the things that would like be actively worse for it, trying to think, like something like Rocky, I think would be actively worse for it. Like you ruin that movie by like movies about triumph or overcoming or like things like that are definitely like are hurt by the revelation that none of it was real. So like if it's a movie about some kind of Herculean feat or accomplishment, to reveal that it was all just a dream undercuts that whole thing. That's
all right. Let me ask you this, Andrew. Inception. Do you think that movie has a dream ending?
Chris, I have to be honest with you. I don't care. No, but no, that's I know that's one of the most heavily debated films, just because you don't see if the top stops, and that would be
I want to know what you think, Andrew.
I like my gut instinct is always that it was a dream. That was like I've read tons of versions of both sides of why it is and why it isn't, but like the first time I watched it, the fact that you never saw it drop, that to me was I was like, so it's not real. Like you purposely chose to leave on that. So I always kind of assumed it was a dream.
It's a little bit different of a dream ending, because what we have been talking about is a dream ending means everything we've already seen didn't really happen. Whereas in Inception, if you subscribe to the dream ending, it means what's we're seeing like moving forward would be a dream, but everything we saw throughout the movie still actually happened. But I'm definitely in camp he's dreaming at the end. And I know the purpose is he doesn't stay to watch the top because he doesn't care if he's in a dream anymore. He's no longer obsessed with it. That's I get all that. Yeah. But come on, what really happened? I think it's a dream. Just because you've got this businessman that says, hey, if you do this for me, I'll make a phone call and all your warrants just magically go away. And it's not explained anywhere beyond that. And to me, the only way, I don't care how rich you are in this world, the only way you could do that is by putting that person into a constant dream state. And the movie makes it a point to establish earlier that there are places where people live permanently in dream states. Like, it makes it a point to show us that is a thing in this world. So I think at the end of that movie, Leo was in a constant dream state, and he's happy because he gets to be with his kids, but it's not real, and you can't change my mind.
It's like the Matrix when Cypher, when you're all young and optimistic watching it, and you're like, why would Cypher want to be put back into the Matrix? It's not real. I don't understand. And now you're in your mid-30s and you're nowhere where you wanted to be, and you're like, all right, I get it. I absolutely get why you would prefer just being in a state of complete ignorance to the reality of the world. And
that steak looks pretty good.
It does. It looks pretty good. I've always, genuinely, honestly, it's never something like when a movie ends on ambiguity, I've always just kind of been like, all right, cool. You want me to guess. You don't want me to know. I've always I've always been fine leaving it at that. I've never been somebody that's just like, I gots to know.
Nolan has a few movies where they're left open-ended, and he's always made it a point not to definitively say one way or the other, and I think that's the right way to go.
It's kind of like Blade Runner. The whole mystery of the original Blade Runner is Deckard a replicant? Like that's
okay. All right. Here's the thing. I don't know if we're gonna get a chance to talk about Blade Runner on the show or not, but that's what I always heard about that movie before watching it. Like, oh, it's a big mystery. You know, Philip K. Dick is known for that kind of stuff. Or like, is he a replicant? I don't think that question is ever presented to you in that movie. I don't think that's a narrative purpose in that movie at all. Like, I watched the movie and I'm like, I don't disagree. I'm like, no, he's not a replicant. Why would I think that? It's almost like someone came up with the theory, and because there's nothing in the movie that explicitly says he's not a replicant, then it becomes like this thing. But I think that aspect of Blade Runner is very overrated.
I think it is definitely a theory that was born in the aftermath of the film. I feel like Ridley Scott has kind of said that the intention was for it to be ambiguous, but like you said, the movie doesn't call attention to it, which doesn't, again, I'm not saying that doesn't mean it wasn't a plan, but the movie at no point is asking you to question the humanity of Deckard. It is never asking you to do that. The whole thing is that Deckard is saving a replicant. Like that's the source of tension. It's not whether Deckard is a replicant. And it's one of the things I really like about Blade Runner 2049 is it spends zero time on that. It wastes absolutely. It gives no precedence to that question whatsoever. And I appreciate it doing that immensely because it's one of those things that almost assuredly, like you said, I think it was born in the aftermath of the film. And it's a mystery that I think, a mystery, quote unquote, that is better not being solved. I do not think that is a question that ever needs to be answered. Ridley Scott has given a variety of answers now on both sides. Harrison Ford has gone on record and says he doesn't care, which is where I mostly land. But yeah, it's still, people out there question it. But yeah.
All right, to go back to this original question here. I think there's a ton of movies that would be ruined if it became a dream ending. I think that part's pretty easy. Like I said, indie movie with triumph. If it's just all a dream, like you're gonna feel cheated. But a movie that would still be good, even if it turns out to be a dream ending, the best I can do here is to take a movie that is ambiguous and just say, even if it explicitly told me it was a dream, it would still be good. And so I'm gonna pick Total Recall. Again, also Philip K. Dick, I believe.
Yes.
The end of that movie is ambiguous. Was this all part of the dream escape that he asked for, or did he really break out of that machine? And if you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. But it leaves it open-ended. But even if they explicitly had a scene at the end where he was waking up in the machine, I still think it would be a fun ride, and I would still be on board, and I don't really think it would hurt the movie.
No, and if anything, it would kind of add to it, because he would wake back up in the machine, and you would be like, oh, okay, that was all part of the simulation, but then there would still be that piece of your brain that was like, or was it? Because
you can't get out of the ambiguity.
Like, you can't really, because like if you reveal that he's in the machine at the end of the movie and it was all in the simulation, there's going to be people like, well, how do you know they didn't just put him back in it after they captured him? Like, there's no guarantee that he was in the chair the whole time. And so you would actually, arguably, like you said, add to the ambiguity of that. What is real? What is fake? And I think that's actually a really good answer, because I'm trying to think of movies that would just be like, because it's strange, because for a lot of movies, for it to not matter that it's a dream, it kind of needs to be a movie where there's, for me, no stakes. Like, the stakes are not changed by the events of the movie not happening. And I'm trying to think of things like that. And I don't know. That's a tough one for me. Like, I think Total Recall is kind of a good middle ground of like, the whole point is questioning reality. So an ending about how it wasn't real can play into that immensely. I mean, you could probably take some of David Lynch's movies and do a similar mindset of like, it was all a dream, but, kind of leave it on that note of, or was it? Like, a lot of David Lynch's stuff would probably not really be hurt by the revelation that it was a dream, because a lot of his stuff plays with the idea of like visions and dreaming and things like that. So you're not necessarily undoing the events of the movie by revealing it's a dream. A movie I watched recently that I think you might have been able to do that with was maybe Lost Highway, because that is a movie that is very strange. But the whole middle sequence of the film is basically kind of a fever dream by this character, or this is kind of how it's been roughly explained, is that the middle sequence of that film is essentially the main character from the first part having a fever dream about what he thinks his ideal life would be, as, this new character played by Balthazar Getty, our original character played by Bill Pullman. And if you revealed to me at the end that movie was that the events of that were all a dream, I wouldn't be particularly shocked to find that it wasn't quote unquote actually happening, but obviously giving answers to any questions ever is not something David Lynch does. So I hesitate to think that he would ever do an ending like that, or at least not present it in such a way that it would be it'd be that kind of thing of like, all right, it was just a dream, it never happened, or did it, sort of thing. Like that whole idea of like, was it real, wasn't it real, what does it matter? So yeah.
Right.
So I fall into a similar space of having a hard time picking.
Tell me if I'm ruining the movie or if it still works, Andrew. All right. Shawshank Redemption. It plays out just like we see. Tim Robbins gets out. Morgan Freeman gets out later. He tracks him down. They reunite on the beach. Fade to white. Morgan Freeman wakes up in prison still. And he's way older. He's like 90 and all gray. And he looks out the window. Bird flies by. Credits roll. That ruined the movie?
I think that would still... I don't think it ruins it, no.
It just goes from happy to depressing?
Right. It's just a more... it's a more... I don't know if you want to call it realistic ending, but that's what it is. It's like the idea that both these guys... Well, Morgan Freeman's character doesn't escape from prison. He just gets out of prison. So I don't know. I think you would... I don't think it ruins it. It just makes it a much more bleak ending, which doesn't necessarily hurt the film. But yeah, like a lot of Hitchcocks, I think if you revealed they were dreams would be worse for it. I think there might be some where it would work. It's
I don't know.
I don't know.
It's a tough one.
That's an interesting question. That is a very interesting question.
It's one of those questions I'm going to be thinking about for like weeks to come. Like 3 weeks from now, we're going to have another episode. Let me go back to this dream question. I just thought of this, but yeah, great question. Thanks for the question, Oculus Neko. And if you've got a good answer for this, a movie that would be improved or utterly ruined by a dream sequence.
Yeah.
What movie can you ruin the most by it all being a dream? I would love to hear what you can come up with. Hit us up on social, or of course, just jump into that Discord and let us know there. Enjoy the spooky movies this month, and just remember that maybe not every movie is great,
but all movies have greatness.
Thank you to Mark Benavides for singing our theme song. Follow him on Instagram at NotThatMarkAnthony. Thanks to Mitch for the music. Check him out on Twitter at I'm a Biggie Boy, and check our show notes for the SoundCloud link. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend. It is the only way that we grow. And follow us on social media at BOTRcast. Thank you.